This week in CIST 1520, we're going to look at tutorial number 10. We're going to look at different arrays, loops, and conditional statements. In the chapter, we're going to learn to create an array, how to populate that array, look at arrays, properties, methods, create a program loop, work with a for loop, write a comparison and logical operators, create conditional statements, and also use the if statement. We're going to start off talking about the monthly calendar. So when you add a calendar to your website, the calendar should appear in the form of a web table. In there, it will have links to specific events placed within the table cells. With the calendar, when you're working with the calendar, you should be using the CSS style sheet for the appearance of the calendar. We'll see some code here of how to link a style sheet and a JavaScript sheet into our HTML. And we also see here at the bottom that we've got an ID of calendar. It's going to be applied to the that div element. So when we're working with calendar arrays, we see that we want to have a name and ID. It's going to be applied to different parts of the calendars. That way we can easily format those individual sections. So we can go into our style sheets and apply different sections. For example, the cell containing the current date for the ID calendar _ today. We can apply different font, different bold, strong style. For example, different attributes we can apply to that cell. Now, when we're working on a calendar, that's something that's going through the chapter. You can create it with a single function. Name, for example, this one, create calendar. We see the initial code to generate the calendar. So we got our variable of this day. We got it set to a new date, and the date of August 24, 2018. In here, we're calling in the calendar and doing the inner HTML. And calling the create calendar and set it to this day, which this day variable is going to store the current date. So when we're looking at a calendar, some of the functions we use to get month, that's going to extract the month number. Get full year, we'll extract the full 4-digit year value. When we're using that date method, though, keep in mind that it does not go into return the name of the month. So you're just going to get the numeric value for that. So one way we want to associate each month number with a month name is by using an array. So when we look at an array, array can be defined as a variable that's going to store multiple functions or multiple values. So it's a collection of values organized under a single name. Those values are going to be stored in an index. That's the number of each individual value that's going to be associated with it. And it's going to distinguish it from other values in the array. So we see the syntax for the array and then the index number here. Array, this is going to be the name of the array, and this is going to be the numeric value that's going to be specific to the individual values in the array. Now our index values are going to start with 0. So the initial item in an array has to have a value of 0. Second will have the index value of 1, and so forth. So we see an example here. So if we have an array of month name and the index value of 4, now that's going to reference the 5th month of the year, not the 4th, because we start off with 0. So January would be set to 0, February to 2, March to 3, April to 4, and in this case, we would have May would be set May would be set, and it would pull up the 5th month. So when we set the array, we can set an array this way, we can declare the variable array, and we set it to new array, and then the length. So in this case, this is going to be the name of the array, where length is going to be the number of items in the array. Now this is something that's going to be optional. Now if you have the length set, the array is going to be that number of items. If you leave this out, the array is going to expand as more items are added to this. You can also populate an array by specifying both the array name and the index number. So we see the command here of array and the index number, and then we're setting it to a value. So that's the value that you're going to assign to this number. So for example, going back to our example that we had of month name. So if we're going to set array 1, and we can set it to February. Array 2, if you wanted to set the value of that to September, you could. Now you can also populate an entire array with a single statement. So you don't have to go in and set in each individual number. You can use a comma separated list. So we see the example here of the variable month name. We're setting it to a new array, and inside the parentheses, we're setting in quotations the values, and we're using the comma to separate them. So we have January, February, March, and so forth throughout the rest of the months. And we can separate these. We can do this in one statement. Okay, an array literal. Now that creates an array which the array values are comma separated lists within a set of square brackets. All right, so then here we're setting the variable array, and then we're inserting the values. So values are the values of the array. Okay, so we see in this case we're setting a new array. In this way, we're just setting a variable that's creating the array. One thing about arrays, they don't have to be the same value type, same data type. So you can mix numeric values, text strings. For example, here we have variable X, and we're setting it to April 3.14, true, and null. So those are the values that are being placed within the array. JavaScript arrays are automatically going to expand as more items are added, so the length property is going to expand. You can use the length property to determine the array's current size, so the array.length. In this case, array is going to be the name of the array. The value is going to return to the length property. That's something that's going to be equal to one or more of the highest index numbers in the array. Sparse arrays are created when some of the array values are undefined. So in this case, we may have a problem with the length values not always the same as the number of array values. This is something that you can't reduce that length property without removing items that's within the array. This is something that's going to occur frequently with database applications. Now, when you add items to an array, they're going to be added to that array either in the order they have been added, or if you explicitly designate an index number for that. By default, that's the two ways to add an array. So we do have some ways that we can go in and change the order of the arrays. We can use the sort method or the reverse method. Reverse method is going to reverse the order of items in the array. So it's going to take the last item added and make it the first. And it'll take the first item and make it the last. So it's just flipping the orders. Sort array is going to rearrange an array items in alphabetical order. So when the sort method, when applied to the numeric values, it's going to sort the values by their leading digits instead of the numeric values. So what we can use with the sort is the compare function. It's going to compare the values of the two adjacent array items. So we see the example here. We've got the function, F name, the first name, A and B. Okay, A and B are the parameters that are being checked. And it's going to either return a positive, negative, or 0 value. So when it goes through and looks at this on the comparison of the two adjacent arrays, if a negative value is returned, A is going to be placed before B in the array. If a positive value is returned, B is going to be placed before A. If a 0 value is returned, A and B are just going to retain their original positions. So when we look at sorting numeric values in ascending order, so we got the function ascending. We're going to pass in the parameters of A and B. So we see A minus B, what we returned. We can also do that in the opposite way and do the descending, where then B minus A is what is going to be returned. So we see here how we've applied now the compare function applied to the sort method. So we have the array.sort and then the first name. So the first name is the name of the compare function. That's what we're looking at in this. So we see the example here is x.sort ascending, where x would be the name of the array. We have called the sort function. And then ascending is the compare function. The subarrays are a section of an array. To create one of these, we'd use a slice method. We see an example of the array, and then here we have the slice and the start and stop values. Excuse me. In this case, starts the index value of the array where you want to start the slicing. Stop's going to be where the index value ends. If you don't have a stop put into this, the array is going to slice at the end of the array. Splice is going to remove and insert array values. So we see once again the example of the array.splice. So splice, we got our start point, the size, that's the number of array items to remove after the start index. And the value, that's an optional comma separated list of values to insert into the array. So if you don't install values, if you don't put stuff into that section, it's simply going to remove the items from the array. This will always alter the original array using the splice method. All right, a stack. Arrays can be used to store information in data structures. When you add new items to the array, it's going to be added to the end of the array. The last in, first out principle is going to be employed with a stack data structure. So when you do this, the item is the last item's added to the stack or with the first one's removed. A push method that will append new items to the end of the array. So here we have array.push, and then the values here. Values is the comma separated list, the values you're adding to the end of the array. A pop method will remove or unstack the last item. A queue employs the first in, first out principle. So the first items added to the data list are the first removed. Similar to the stack method. A couple other methods, the shift method removes the first array item. Unshift method inserts new items at the front of the array. You can also use program loops. Program loops can be used to populate an array. There are a set of commands that are executed repeatedly until a stopping condition is met. Two most common used in JavaScript are the for loops or the while loops. So for the for loops, you're going to use a variable as a counter, and that variable is used to track the number of times a block of command is ran. Now, when that counter reaches or exceeds a specific value, the for loop is going to stop. We also see here the general structure for a for loop. So we say that here for or start, how the loop should continue, and then update the loop. And then in here will be the actual commands that are ran. So we see what we're having is the start is going to be the expression that sets the initial value of the counter variable. The continue is going to be a Boolean expression that must be true for the loop to continue. Updates the expression that indicates how the value of the counter variable should change each time it runs through the loop. And the commands are the JavaScript statements. The JavaScript statements that are run for each loop. Okay, so I'm going to pull up some of the code that you have. I'll give you an example. So we're looking at the for loop. So we're saying for the variable of I. Let's see if I can zoom in here. All right, so looking at for loop, so we'll say for the variable I equals 0, and I is less than the item.length, and this is increasing I every time this is ran through. So each time this loop is ran through, these commands are executed. Once it exits out of the loop, all of these commands are executed. Once it goes through the loop, it's going to come back, and then next time the variable I is going to be set to 1. As long as this condition is still true, the loop will run again. So this loop is adding one row table, or one table row for each item ordered. But as long as this is true, this is going to run. Once this number makes this I exceed the item.length, and this is no longer true, your program will exit out of the loop and continue executing the rest of the program. All right, so the command block is a collection of commands that is run each time through the loop. Okay, so you got these that are going to be between the curly braces. Now you can have nested loops. You can have a for loop that's going to be nested within another loop. Looking at figure 1010, this is the for loop counters. So we see the values of these every time we go through. So, for example, this one here is for variable I is equal to 1. And as long as I is less than or equal to 5, and we're going to increase it by 1 every time we go through. So as long as this I is less than or equal to 5, this counter will run. This loop will run. Each time you see it go through. First time it's going through, it's 1. Second time, 2. Okay, so this will run up until the I is equal to 5. So when I is, I'm sorry, 6, because it does have the equal. So as long as 5 is equal to, less than or equal to 5, this will run. After it hits 5, the next time it runs through, it'll come up and say I is equal to 6. 6 is not equal to or less than 5. So in that case, it will exit out of the loop. You can also use the minus signs to count down. So this is going in reverse, for example. So we're starting out I is equal to 5. As long as I is greater than 0, the loop will run. Each time it runs through, it's reducing I by the value of 1. And each one of these, you'll see that the counter values are set based on what you have set here is how you increment or decrement, and then the values and the conditions. Now, a while loop is a command block that runs as long as a specific condition is met. This is something that does not depend on the value of the counter variable. All right, so we see here the general syntax for a while loop is while this condition is met, this Boolean expression is here, run these commands. We can also use a do while loop. So a do while loop, so it says, for example, do these commands while this condition exists. All right, so each time it will test this condition. If it is still true or false, depending on how you set. If this is still meets the condition for it to run, it will run back through the loop. So we can use comparison or logical operators as well that will compare the values of one expression or to another. It's going to return a Boolean, a true, false value, indicate whether the comparison is equal or not. So we see the different operators. That's going to, for example, the two equal signs, so x equal sign y. In that case, it's going to test whether x is equal to value at y. And you have different ones. For example, the 3 is going to test the value and also whether the data type. You have your greater than, equal signs, exclamation mark, equal signs. It'll say test whether x is not equal to y. You can also use logical operators. It's going to allow several expressions to be connected. So, for example, here, the two and signs. So look at this. We'll say, so we're looking to see whether x is equal to 5 and y is equal to 8. So will those conditions be true? Both of those will have to be true for the values to come back as positive. Or means that only one of the two have to meet those criteria. Explanation mark means not. So we're looking at this. So we're testing whether or not x is less than 5. So there it's going to look and says if x is not less than 5. You can also, like I said, you can cycle through different values contained within an array. The general structure for accessing each value. So we look at the variable I. So we're saying for variable I equals 0. And as long as I is less than the array length, then we're going to increase I each time we run through this. And then here we have our command block that's going to tell us the commands that are going to be running. That's going to involve the array I. So in here, array is going to contain the values we loop through. I is going to be the counter variable used in the loop. One second here, I'm going to try to find you an example of this. All right, so the example we have here, zoom in here. So we see the general structures for variable I. We're going through with commands involving the array. So this would be an example of this. So we're saying for variable I equals 0, as long as I is less than the event's dates dot length, and we're going to increase I each time we run through this. So we have the variable is going to be set to the new date, and then we're calling back in the array and the array index. So we're going through checking, and then we have this go to run if the event is within a 2-week window. Okay, so this is going to be a nested loop. I'm sorry, this is going to be a condition that's going to be ran inside of this loop. So we're going to check, set the variable dates here. We'll run the commands down in here, setting the date as we go through the array. You can also go through and with JavaScript, there's several methods that are supported to loop through the contents of an array. With these arrays, you can methods are going to be based on calling the function that will apply to each item in the array. So we see the general syntax for this is the array.method and then the callback. In this case, this argument, that's the callback optional argument we use to pass a value onto the function. Breaking this down, we see that array is going to be the array name. Method is any array method. And callback, that's going to be the name of the function that's applied to each array item. The general syntax for using the callback function is on your screen. Function callback, in parentheses, value, in the brackets with index array. And then inside the curly brackets, we have our commands. So in this, the value is going to be the value of the array item during each pass through the array. Index is the numeric index of the current array item. Array is the name of the array. In this, only the value is going to be required. For each method, it's going to run a function for each item in the array. So we start general syntax here is array for each. Callback is going to be the function it's applied. The map method, that's the function that calls a return to a value that can be used to map the contents of an existing array into a new array. So for example, we have the variable x. It's got the values of 3, 8, and 12. So we're going to create the variable y. We'll use the map method with the function of doublet. And you see it returns 2 times the value. The filter method extracts array items that match some of a specified condition. So we see the array.filter, then we have the callback function, go return a Boolean value, true or false, for each item in the array. These items, any values that are come back true are going to be copied into the new array. The every method returns a value of true if every item in the array matches the condition from the callback function. Otherwise, it's going to come back and say it's false. Some methods going to come back and return a value of true if some of the array items match the condition. The only way you'll get a false in a sum method is if none of the items match. So these are a couple ways you can filter an array. For example, the sum, we're call back this argument, test whether the conditions returned by the callback function holds at least one of the items in the array, that it is true for one of the items in the array. Parallel array, so each entry in the array matches or is parallel with it to an entry in another array. When we look at conditional statements, it runs a command or command block only when certain circumstances are met. We also look at the if statement. So with the if statement, we're going to go back and look at the conditionals. So this is going to be your most common conditional statement. So our general syntax of this is, if this condition exists, run these commands. So we'll look at the condition is going to be a Boolean expression. It could be something that's either true or false. And then if it meets that condition, then the commands are going to be ran. It's going to use the same logical or comparison operators used with the program loops. A modulus operator returns an integer remainder after dividing one integer by another. Let's say you can nest statements. So you have, in this example here, we have one if statement that's going to be nested within another. So we're looking at, okay, we're proceeding to calculate leap years, working with a calendar. Looking at these statements as if this year, modulus of 4, so if the year is divisible by 4, and either not divisible by 100 or divisible by 400, it's a leap year. So what here we're saying, looking at the syntax here, the flow chart, we're saying, is it divisible by 4? If no, we can stop there and the program exits out of the loop. So if it says yes, it goes down and checks the next condition. Is it divisible by 100? If no, it is a leap year. If yes, it says, okay, well, is it divisible by 400? If no, it's not a leap year. If yes, it is a leap year. So this way our calendar would know how many days to add to February. An if-else statement that chooses between an alternate command blocks. So it's going to run one command block if that condition is true, and a different command block if the expression is false. So our general structure here says if the condition, so if this condition is true, we're going to run this set of commands and ignore this. Okay, so if this condition is not true or is not met, so if this is not met, we're going to ignore this command and we're going to run these commands down here. We can also use an if-else statement. Okay, so we'll say if condition 1 is true, run command 1. If not, we're going to check and see if condition 2 exists. If this one is met, we'll run these commands instead. If neither one of these conditions are met, we're going to run the else commands, the default commands. So this is where we can test multiple conditions and then give the program a set of default commands. Break statements will terminate any program loop or conditional statement. These can be used anywhere within the program code. Now, when a break statement is encountered, control is passed to the statement immediately following it. This is something that's going to be used most of the time to exit a program loop before the stopping condition is met. A continued stop statement stops processing commands in the current iteration of the loop and continues on the next time it runs through the loop. So it's a way to jump out of the current run of the loop if you're missing an error null value is encountered. I highly recommend you use statement labels. This is identified statements in JavaScript code so that it can be referenced elsewhere in the program. So the syntax of a statement label is the label statements. The label is going to be the name of the label. And the statements are the statements identified by that label. Okay, so in this chapter, we've looked at creating arrays, working with different ways to populate the array, looking at different program loops, for loops, if-else loops, if loops, while loops. And that's going to conclude the tutorial chapter 10.